So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this online session. Today we have another great speaker from California. We have Shannon Moore. So welcome to everyone, Academy Shannon.
Hello, hello. Excited to be here, everybody.
So Shannon is going to present, herself to the Moroccan and to the Arab audience in general, and then we can start sharing the presentation. So welcome again, Shannon, and you can present yourself to the audience, a little
Awesome.
introduction about your background and maybe your future project. And I know that you are involved in so many projects with Georgina and other educators. So feel free to talk about this. Welcome.
Sure. Would love to. Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on today. I'm really excited to connect with everybody. My name is Shannon Moore. I live in Visalia, California. So I am in California, right smack in the middle. And I've been an educator for 10 years. And I love every minute of it. You know, there's all those conversations about, this is what I was meant to do. And I truly believe, as cliche as it sounds, this is what I was meant to do. I was meant to teach. So I have been an English teacher, like I said, for the past 10 years. For the last 4 years, I have also taught speech, introduction to public speaking, and I started that program at my school site. I currently work at Redwood High School in Visalia, California. Shout out to all my Rangers. And, I also this year with the pandemic, I have kind of shifted roles just a little bit, and I've added an additional kind of component to my plate. I am an ed tech coach as well. So I am supporting educators at my site to get them, ready to rock and navigate this pandemic education to the best of their ability. It's been a challenge, but it's been fun doing it with all of my peers. I'm also the English department head, so I run our English department as well. I am a, huge fan of cats. I have 2 cats, no kids. So there's that personal side of me, love them. And I have a lot of projects that are going on right now. So I personally, one of my joy projects, I've joined up with 2 other amazing rock star educators, Georgina Dean, who was on the show a couple weeks ago, and 𝘀𝗀𝗂𝗶𝗃𝗀𝗃, who also lives in California. Georgina lives in Amman, Jordan. And we've started a podcast. It's called the 𝘁𝗀𝗄𝐻𝑎𝑓𝑖𝑛ated Coaches. And we're really focusing in on all things coaching, mentoring, leading, teaching across education. And so we're really looking to connect and inspire and celebrate other educators alongside our journey. I'm also a global GEG leader. And so GEG stands for Google Educator Group. So I kind of am working with people all across the world to make the world a smaller, better place. And we're providing trainings. You can check them out on YouTube, Global GEG. I am also a co-leader for Global GEG. We have a program called EC Open Chat for those who are interested in getting their Google coaching certification. We have a network of individuals that we come together. We do monthly meetings and book studies and all of the above. So I'm busy, but I love it. So it's what we do, and I'm grateful that I get a chance to be here today. So thank you again, Aziz, for reaching out.
So you are more than welcome. I saw some a session of the program or the project that you are doing with Georgina and Vicky, and I learned a lot, especially about learning how to live in the discomfort and great ideas. You are discussing great ideas, really.
Thank
So keep
you
it up.
so much. Thank you so much. We are actually really excited too, because our next episode, which will be launching not this week, but the following, is going to be Georgina is going to take the lead on that one. And we are unique. We have a podcast book study. So we have a slow chat slide deck that individuals can fill out. We're reading a book by called How to Lead. And it's been great so far. We're excited, and Georgina is going to go ahead and share all the awesome insights on our next podcast episode. So stay tuned. If you want to check us out, you can find us at 𝘁𝗹𝗸𝗶𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Yeah. Thank you so much for listening too. It's really awesome to hear that it is having impact across the world. It's something that brings us joy. And so we're glad that, it's bringing other people joy as well.
Yes, it's amazing. This kind of project are really amazing because when we come together, we learn. Because
Absolutely.
no one knows everything. We educators need each other because for
Absolutely.
example we have the people who are good in technology. We have people who are good in languages. We complement each other.
Yeah, one hashtag we constantly use across Twitter is #BetterTogether, because it truly is, that we as educators can't go do this alone. And we kind of mentioned that in the last podcast episode, that if you're trying to, navigate this challenging time of education in a silo or by yourself, you're going to find yourself discouraged. But if you have a professional learning network that can come alongside you and encourage you and build you up and challenge you, those are the moments where we grow the most. So I 100% agree with you. I think that is a really apt point.
Yes, and that's also the main objective of creating this creating Everyone Academy. We are trying to make teachers come together, help each other. Not only teachers in Morocco, but teachers from every country, from the United States, from Canada, from Japan, from teachers, English teachers help each other.
Yes, and honestly, I've caught a couple of your episodes over the last few weeks, and I'm impressed and in awe of all the connections that you're making. You're building this huge network, and I love that it comes from that passion of wanting to inspire and empower educators as we move together. So bravo to you, because I think this is a great thing that you're doing here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So you can start sharing your presentation if you want.
Sure.
Because
all right.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're good. You can see my screen. We're good to go.
Yes.
All right, then let's go ahead and jump in, if you will. I'm gonna just give a little bit of a background about me. I, haven't always been a communicator. I did get my degree, even though I do teach English, I did get my degree in college or in university in communication. And I'm really, really passionate about it. But for most of my life, communication wasn't something that I was strong in. In fact, I can recount multiple instances where I had to get up and speak in high school in front of my peers. And there were 2 accounts specifically, 2, not just 1, but 2, where I actually passed out in front of the class just because I was so nervous to engage in discussion. And so this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, because I truly believe discussion allows us to grow as individuals, but also really enhances the classroom environment. And I'm going to go into that today. First, I do want to kind of point out that these are just experiences that I have. I know that there are a variety of other experiences out there, a ton of other educators out in the world who are doing amazing things. And if you're not on social media, either Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram, following educators, I really do encourage you to start developing your PLN, your professional learning network, on those sites, because I've learned so much and have gotten so many resources, which I'll show you today, a couple. Sharing is caring, and that is so prevalent across Twitter, EduTwitter. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, so we're going to dive in. I've kind of already introduced myself. Biggest thing you should know about me is I love what I do. And at the core of what I do is it's all about relationships and connections. And I believe discussion kind of helps with that in the process. And so we're going to dive into that just a little bit. The goals for today, we're really going to understand the impact that quality discussion can have on the classroom. I'm going to identify some challenges that educators may face while they're trying to implement some discussion, strategies, and then offer some solutions or strategies that may help combat those challenges that we talked about, okay? So let's dive in. First and foremost, we need to talk about the why. I think with any good lesson, any good approach to anything, we really need to talk about why does it matter? So why do discussions matter? Well, first and foremost, as you can see there, discussions invite students to really actively engage with not only the content, the curriculum, but also their peers and their teachers. Let me stop for just a second. If at any point along the way you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'd love to try to answer those. And Aziz can go ahead and interrupt me in that. So back to it. If students are engaged and they're engaging beyond just, the personal level, they've really engaged at the academic level as well, we're going to start to see them kind of become co-creators of knowledge and learning. And I think that is the goal for most educators, right? So many times we have educators who, resort to what's comfortable or resort to what we remember when we were also in school. And it's that idea of being, like I mentioned this in the last podcast episode, the sage on the stage, where the teacher gets up and they give all of the knowledge or the ideas or the information, right? And then the students end up becoming just passive, receivers of that information. No true inquiry or critical thinking goes into that process. And so, with discussion, if we can implement discussion in the classroom, we end up giving some of the control over to the students, which allows them to then create that knowledge and learning. So not only is it information that they're creating, but it's going to become more real and they're going to own it a little bit more because it is personal to them and it's not just something someone is telling them, right? We tend to do that as humans. When we are able to wrap our mind around something and come up with our own conclusions, we kind of hold on to that and we own that just a little bit more. So discussions matter, they always have, but they've always, there's always been that struggle. And I feel like that struggle has elevated quite a bit with pandemic teaching. So before we can ask students to do anything and anything at all in the classroom, we have to be mindful that really, truly great communication begins with connection. Now, this is a statement by Oprah Winfrey, who isn't necessarily an educator, nor is she in the education world, but she hits it right on the spot. Great communication begins with connections. And honestly, I know without a doubt that if I first day have my students come into class and I give them something academic to discuss, they're going to shut down. It's just going to happen. And so it's really important, in my opinion and in my experience, that we start that process of incorporating quality discussion in our class by building connections first. And I think we can kind of kill two birds with one stone in that, right? We can build connections and also promote discussions amongst, the peers and with teacher to student, with using a couple really neat activities. So I wanted to share with you just a couple that I've used in my classroom. I'm a proponent. We can't ask students to engage with anything academic, right? It's too high risk initially. We need to ask them to engage with something non-academic first. Give them a low risk task that they need to complete. And then as they become more comfortable and the culture of comfortability is built, then the students will be more willing to really stretch themselves as learners, as co-creators of knowledge. And so what I've done is I use Jamboard quite a bit in my classroom. And I'm gonna, excuse me, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna show you, let me take a drink.
Yes.
Sorry, on a roll there, but here we go. I'm gonna show you a couple things that I've used in my own classroom to kind of get that conversation going. Like I said, low risk, you have to start with low risk activities first, and then you can ask them to really push themselves and take those risks with the more complicated kind of activities. So this right here is something that I've used recently. One thing I noticed in my own classroom, and I do teach full-time in addition to being an ed tech coach, so I'm still in the classroom. One thing I've noticed in my own classroom is the idea that, there's not a lot of hope and inspiration. Just a little bit of background, and I don't know how it is in Morocco, but in California, we have not seen the inside of a classroom since March. When the pandemic hit, we were sent off and we never really returned to the classroom. So we have been 100% virtual since March. And that's been a struggle in a lot of different ways, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But one of the areas that I think a student struggled most in is finding this moment of like, where are they being inspired? If they're not able to engage socially, like in what they consider the normal way, then they start to like have more instances of depression and anxiety, and kind of, you know, with that comes the idea of like they kind of disassociate or not interested in engaging. So I early on in the year, I tried this Jamboard and I asked, what is something recently that has brought you hope or inspiration? Prior to, you know, giving this Jamboard out, I engaged the students in a mini discussion using the Zoom chat, which I'll talk about in a bit, to get them to understand that life is hard, right? And, you know, we have to be mindful of the fact that even though things are a struggle right now, there's always those small moments that we need to hold on to, right? And that kind of preloading, giving them insight to start thinking about those ideas is kind of the first step to get them ready and prepped to then share their own voice and their own perspective. So I always, when I approach even the non-academic low risk activities like this, I always kind of preload with a little like mini pep talk to kind of get them comfortable with the conversation before I ask them to contribute to it. So this is what I posed, and I'll just show you a couple examples. I encouraged my students to always respond on Jamboard with a, you know, written response first. And then I have the opportunity from that point to share my screen, kind of give voice to all of the different, you know, perspectives and experience that are presented. And then if I wanted to, I could gauge the reaction of my students, or really kind of zone in on the students I know will be more comfortable, my more extroverted students, and say, hey, so-and-so, will you please elaborate? What did you mean by, you know, your cat? Tell me how your cat gives you inspiration or hope. And then they have an opportunity to show that personal side of them. And let's be honest, we all know everybody likes talking about themselves, right? But they didn't have to do it in an academic way. It was a personal kind of relational way, you know? And then for my students who struggle with maybe the language a little bit, I always give them the opportunity to throw in GIFs or images, because we know that pictures, images are universal, right? Words don't always translate, but images usually do. And so I give them that option, and that gives me another, you know, chance to then call out and be like, hey, so-and-so, I noticed you put a Los Angeles Lakers, like talk to me about your passion about basketball, right? And then they get the opportunity to share out. Or if I don't call them out on that, I now have that information in my bank, right? My memory bank, to say, okay, my student Nahir loves basketball. So later on, when I know that he's struggling or needs a little bit of a push, I can reference that information, right? And then it shows that I'm paying attention and I care about him deeper beyond just him being one student in a Zoom screen window. So these are just a few examples from a couple of my periods. Another way to engage them is I also throw in my own Bitmojis. You can see kind of I comment on them, or I put check marks or stars. Yes, it's not verbally engaging them, right? But it is giving them like, oh, I understand. You said that something that gives you hope is to think of something good or learn something new every day. Well, let me tell you, in image form, knowledge is power, right? And so I've now opened that door for discussion. And although it wasn't me engaging them verbally, I did engage them with an image, and images have power, right? And so it's still kind of opening that line of communication. And so those are just a couple little tactics I use. Another kind of piece that I use to kind of get the students talking amongst themselves in a non-academic way is we do would you rathers, or this or that. And so this one specifically, I have put, you know, some of my students' names on sticky notes, or you can leave them blank and they can go ahead and double click and put their own names on the sticky notes. And then they get to drag their sticky notes, you know, in real time over to wherever they feel like they would align. So Would they rather be the smartest person in their friend group or the most attractive? From there, after you get the students to kind of put their sticky notes down, from there you can go ahead and break them into breakout rooms to have them, like, you know, based on their responses, to have them have a conversation about it, or you could bring it back to the main Zoom room and ask, you know, students to elaborate or give more information. This 5-minute connectors slide deck is also awesome. It is not mine. It is courtesy and curated by Sarah Landis. By the way, on all of my slide deck, I've linked these, so you can go ahead and grab them and use them freely as you please. But in this one, she's given us a ton of different get to know you activities that allow you to start building on those connections in an effort to get the students comfortable in the environment, so that eventually when you get to the academic side of things, they can go ahead and feel, you know, comfortable to take those risks. And then finally, the last one here, this is courtesy of 𝘁𝗶𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, an educator in Ohio. The students can just drag their little round circles and then a sticky note to explain why they chose which emoji they chose for how they're feeling that day. So it all goes back to this idea that great communication begins with connection. Once you have that connection built, and mind you guys, one thing I've learned is it does take a lot of time. It takes time to build connections. And I know sometimes individuals feel, well, if I have to build these connections, then that takes away from my curriculum of what I have to teach. But if we're being honest, your kids, if they don't know that you don't care, if they feel like you don't care, they're not going to invest in whatever the curriculum is anyway. So take the time to build those connections in an effort to, you know, ensure that they feel comfortable enough to, you know, provide and try and take risks in your classroom. I'll go ahead and pause for a second. Aziz, is there anything that, you know, the Facebook world needs, or can I continue on?
Yes, okay, just continue. We'll have comments.
Okay, at the end? Cool.
We don't want to interrupt you, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate, this slide deck is available. If you wanted to type it in and follow along, you can grab it at bit.ly/smore with the capital S, 𝘁𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, Shannon Moore, 𝘁𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃, and then discuss, okay? All right, we're continuing on. Let's talk real quick before we transition to the challenges and the solutions. Let's talk real quick about the advantages. Through my research in regards to discussion, I've found that there are a plethora or quite a few advantages to having like discussion happen in your classroom. First and foremost, we kind of talked on this, but that idea of increased engagement. If students are engaged, like I said, they're going to be more apt to like really try in your classroom. Their knowledge and learning is going to become so much more elevated, right? Versus the student that is disengaged. And you're going to have both, right? Just because you have engaging discussions doesn't mean that all students are going to join you along that journey, because things happen and not all students are going to be there every day. But it does increase the likelihood that more students will kind of engage with the lesson and the learning will increase. The second one there is feedback. Now, feedback is more so for you as an educator. You know, when you are discussing, when you are leading students through discussions, or you're witnessing and listening to their discussions, you are then learning as an educator exactly what they understand and what they don't understand. And so it's giving you real-time feedback that you can use to then remain flexible and kind of pivot or transition your lesson, and you'll know how to move forward. Feedback isn't always easy to get from students, but if you guide them with the appropriate questions and you know exactly what your end goal is, and you kind of work backwards from that using backwards mapping, I believe discussion can be a great aspect for feedback in giving you the insight as to where you need to go. Another one is discussion promotes preparation. Now, this isn't always the case, but I truly believe that if discussion becomes your norm in your classroom, that it's the expectation that students know they're going to come in every day and engage in that discussion around whatever topic it may be, they're going to catch on. And eventually, I believe they will become more like conditioned to come to class prepared for whatever that day is going to be. When you're engaging in, you know, worksheets, right? Time after time, they come in, they fill out a worksheet. You've read something, they fill out a worksheet, right? They don't have to really prep anything. A lot of students have learned how to like navigate that and get away with not doing the prep work because they know they're just going to come in and do a worksheet, right? I'm not saying worksheets are bad all the time, but if you become a worksheet mill, that's where the struggle comes, right? Students can kind of turn on autopilot at that point and it becomes just something I do. If there's a discussion, right, and that becomes the regular, they will start to learn that they can't come to class and quote unquote wing it, right? The expectation is that they will need to come to class prepared if they want to be a part of that discussion and add anything. Now, I also believe that there is power in mob mentality, right? Especially with like students. They want to impress their friends. They don't want to be left behind. And so eventually, you know, even those students who choose not to do the preparation beforehand, if it becomes the expectation and mostly everybody else is, I've seen in my experience that those students, the ones that resist, eventually get on board and try to join along and get prepped because they don't want to continually be left behind. So quality discussions, and if it becomes an expectation in your classroom and a staple of like your lesson design and delivery, it will end up promoting like preparation. And I've learned during this pandemic education, being virtual, that the best way to approach my own classroom has been to do a flipped learning model. And that does require preparation. And in the beginning, it was a lot of, you know, a lot of students coming unprepared because it was a new model. But once it became the norm and, you know, discussion became a part of that, I started to see more and more students come prepared. And then that bottom row, we'll just run through it real quick before we jump into the strategies. It enhances your speaking skills, right? I think a lot of time, you know, for someone that's an English teacher, my standards are, you know, surrounded in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And so it is my job to ensure that the students are speaking regularly to enhance those speaking skills. And discussion obviously adds to that because they're not only having to speak, but they're also learning the skill of being an active listener. And so both of those are hitting the content standards, and hopefully students will end up leaving my classroom, you know, better communicators than when they, you know, entered and started. And I'm going to give a strategy for kind of helping along that process as well. The middle one there on the bottom row, it encourages language and vocabulary development. I'm going to speak about language objectives in a bit. But yeah, discussions really, especially for those students that are second language learners, engaging them in regular discussion, you know, they're able to hear kind of what the expectation is, what the language sound like. I always offer like differentiated supports to ensure that they have those supports in place should they need them. And we're going to talk about sentence frames a little bit later. But it does encourage language, vocabulary, and development if educators are mindful about the fact that when we discuss, it goes beyond just, you know, having a conversation. If we build in opportunities to really use that academic language, then it will not only enhance their speaking skills, but it also will enhance their language skills as well, language acquisition skills. And then finally, it controls the classroom environment a bit, right? So if you have an expectation, right, if you can pose the questions and have the students build upon those, it allows you to kind of set that goal where you want to go and kind of guide students along the way while they're co-creators of knowledge. So it allows for a little bit more control of the environment in the classroom. All right. So I'm going to offer you some solutions and strategies, but I think it's important for us to like establish common ground, right? The fact that we all of us, I don't know one educator out there who does not have challenges when it comes to active and quality discussions in the classroom. And so I kind of wanted to give a personal example of my own. I'm going to be arrogant, not intentionally, but just for a second. I pride myself as an educator in building connections. I do. And so oftentimes, you know, when I'm doing my virtual class, most cameras are on. It's not a problem. But recently there's been since we've come back for second semester, there's been a lot of like no cameras on. Okay. Now this is an image that a screen capture I took of an experience I had end of last semester. And it's the first time that I've experienced what people have been lamenting about all over social media in those that are teaching virtually, this idea that you're the only camera that's on, that all of your students' screens are dark. Now, let me be clear about something. I will never, ever force my students to turn their cameras on. I know some school sites have policies, ours do not. I personally do not think it's okay to force a child to have their camera on because there's things in their background, in their homes, in their lives that we don't know about that maybe they're not proud to share with us or even their classmates, right? I have quite a few students who are responsible for taking care of their siblings while they're in school, their young baby siblings. And so they don't turn their microphones on very often, but they still engage. They engage in the chat, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But we can't force students to be uncomfortable, right? Just because we're uncomfortable. We're the educators in the room. Our goal is to create an environment that is comfortable. And if my students choose to turn their cameras off, then they choose to turn their cameras off. I have a policy in place though. If you're gonna have your camera off, you're still engaging in the chat. And so we'll get to that. But this was an image that I screen captured because it was the first moment in my teaching career this year where I did not have one camera on and I was talking to a bunch of black screens. Now, it was uncomfortable. I'm gonna be honest with you. It felt out of place. I missed the classroom. I missed being face-to-face with students. But it did make me think as an educator, like, what can I do to ensure that each and every individual whose faces I can't see are still engaged, right? That is my task. And I am a big proponent or fan of reading nonverbal language or nonverbal communication. And it's hard to do that when you don't have your cameras on. So that's going to be, or students don't. So that's going to be a challenge, right? That's one challenge we face. Another challenge is, go ahead. What was that?
Face is central to communication.
It's so essential. Yes, you're right. The other challenges we face kind of are captured by these two icons. This one on the right, the idea that, you know, a lot of students, one of the challenges we face with discussions is a lot of students are nervous that they're going to have the wrong answer, right? And so they choose not to participate because they're so afraid of being wrong. And that's just the norm of, I think, society. I think humans in general struggle with that, right? We don't like to fail. And so what I try to do is I try to create a culture that really kind of honors the idea of failing forward, right? That growth mindset. We're not 100% there yet, but we're working towards that. And I'm trying to implement, you know, strategies that help kind of alleviate some of that pressure. And then lastly, the other challenge that I've seen time and time again is I ask students for their responses to questions, and you just get a copycat answer, right? They just, a couple, you know, very, very confident students will speak up, and then all of this other students just kind of mimic what they have to say in different words, right? So you have this like homogeneous one type answer, and it doesn't really allow for that breadth or depth of like responses that you're looking for as an educator. And so I have another solution that I'll offer for that one when I'm tried and has worked kind of really well for me. So those are some strategies. I'd be curious if there's challenges. If there are any challenges that you guys maybe have that you're seeing, pop them in the chat. Maybe we can talk about them at the end. I don't know that I'll have all the answers, but I'm sure that there are so many more challenges out there that we haven't even touched on. All right, so this is my favorite part, right? What are the strategies? What can we do in our own classrooms pragmatically to really kind of move towards creating this quality discussion? And so the first one that I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned earlier, was this idea of language objectives. You know, a lot of educators, we create objectives for our students. It gives them a signpost or a goal to meet, right? Or to look towards throughout the course of the lesson. Oftentimes, when we create content or objectives, they're usually content objectives, right? We're focusing in on the standards, at least in you know, where I live. And so that is one type of objective. Students will be able to do X by doing this, right? Another type of objective that I've tried to kind of implement into my own practice is this idea of a language objective. So once the teacher kind of determines the lesson topic, right? Then they can kind of talk about, okay, what kind of academic language do they want the students to implement or use in order to show their understanding of that activity or that task. It gives the students kind of the words they need to use to ensure that they are demonstrating mastery. And so a couple of these, this is just a resource I've used. It's language that you could use if you're focusing on reading, writing, speaking, or listening. Those are some like action verbs you could use. Here are some steps to craft language objectives. So you want to start with an action verb, right? That's connected to the domain, or like, so reading, writing, speaking, or listening, right? So for example, this one says students will be able to describe, right? Step 2 will be to identify what is the academic content you're going to be focusing on in that moment and link that. So students will be able to describe the water cycle. Step 3 is where you add the supports and scaffolds like graphic organizers, videos, sentence frames, etc. Using an illustration. And then step 4 includes the interaction. This is like that interactive engagement piece with peers or teacher. And so the whole thing is students will be able to describe the water cycle using an illustration in a small group. Now students know that like they're focusing in on whatever that science standard is, but in addition to that, their goal is to be able to describe the water cycle, and they're going to be doing it in a small group using an illustration. Okay, so it gives students the context of like what the scenario is going to be, the situation. It tells them exactly what they need to do in reasonable language that they can grab onto, and it gives them a goal to work towards as they kind of move through the class. So language objectives are a little different. We don't always use them in class here in the States, but I found them to be very, very valuable in addition to the content objectives, to give our students a focus and also clarity of like how the class is going to be conducted that day. The next strategy I would recommend, depending on what you use, if you're virtual or if you're concurrent teaching with students face-to-face, or even hybrid, these Zoom, Meet, Teams polling. Okay, so this is if you have individuals on screen. There's also resources for those of you who are fully face-to-face, but you have maybe one-to-one computers. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're in Zoom or you're using Meet, Google Meet, or Microsoft Teams to engage your students, I always use the polls. Like I said, I always start off with something non-academic first to get them kind of engaged and interested, show them that I care about what they have to say and who they are as people. And then I can use it for a kind of entrance ticket, just to kind of gauge where they're at. Most of the time, because I'm flipping my classroom, I need to kind of gauge their understanding of whatever they were supposed to complete in preparation for that day's class. And so I'll maybe throw out a quick little poll asking a question about some of the content they looked at, or I will throw out a poll like gauging their understanding, like on a scale of 1 to 5. And I'm very, very overt and clear about what those mean, 1 through 5. And then I also use it as exit tickets. I always incorporate reflections at the front and the back of the lesson. And so I can use it as a reflective piece at the end. Now, every time there's a poll, I always take the time to then ask students to elaborate, right? This gives me a gauge, kind of directs me, where are we gonna go? And then I'll say, okay, I noticed that 54% of you guys, said you struggled with last night's reading. Let's go ahead and stop for just a second. I'm gonna break you out into breakout rooms, make sure that you have clarity of understanding, have a dialogue with your peers. What is it exactly you didn't understand? And then we'll come back to do a share out. Okay, so it just gives us a good gauge to get us to pivot, transition, and figure out where we're going to go with the rest of the class, or even where we should go after class is over. And like I said, it's academic or non-academic, and it's just a quick kind of check for understanding to direct the discussion for that day. Another task, and this is the one that like I am a huge fan of. I was listening to, I don't know if you guys have heard of the distance learning playbook by 𝘁𝗶𝗺𝗲 that they put out. I was listening to a webinar by them a couple months ago, and they discussed this idea, or they didn't even discuss it, I'm sorry, in the chat of the webinar, somebody mentioned this idea of the waterfall chat. or they call it the nitro chat. You really could call it, you know, 𝘁𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗲. I don't know, like to mimic chat and avalanche, whatever people prefer, but it's a really great resource to ensure that you're not getting those copycat answers. And just so we're clear on here, I've linked both of these graphics so you can grab them and use them. I created them using Adobe Spark, which I'm a huge fan of. And you can use them in your own classroom, share them with your fellow educators. If you find this valuable, by all means, go for it. So here's how waterfall chat works, if you're not familiar. So you start by posing a question, and then you give the students think time. So, you know, whatever that question may be, you give them think time, and you ask them to create a response. And for example, say they're using like the Zoom chat. You ask them to type in the Zoom chat, okay? Create a response, type it in the Zoom chat or the Google Meet chat or whatever, but don't press enter, don't send it yet. And you have everybody, you give them think time, you have time for them to respond. Nobody like pushes enter yet, they just hold on to that thought and it just lives in the chat. And you really have to reiterate over and over again, like, okay, as you're crafting, don't push enter. Like your first instinct is gonna be like to push enter. Don't be that person, like hold that thought, right? And then after like a set amount of time, you say, okay, everybody's gonna push enter on the count of 3, 2, 1. And then you just see all of these chats fall into the Zoom chat, right? And it's just a plethora of ideas that just come down, and it's unique perspectives because they didn't just piggyback on like whatever the previous person said. So then what I do is I stop after they've pushed and I like scroll back up and I give voice to every single response in the chat. And on some of them, if I feel like, oh, this, you know, warrants like them explaining a little bit more, I'll say, oh my gosh, you know, John, this is an exceptional answer. Could you go ahead and unmute and elaborate for me, or at least share in the chat, unmute and or add more to the chat and let us know kind of what you were thinking. And so it gives people like that confidence to then say something, and whether it's right or wrong, it's not coming in one at a time. They don't have that fear of like being singled out because it falls all together. So nobody's like watching them come in one at a time. It's a really great strategy and kids love it. We do it all the time. I do it multiple times at a class period usually for both academic and non-academic things and discussions. So it just allows the conversation to continue on. I wanted to go back one step back that I didn't mention. I mentioned that if you have a Zoom, Meet, and Teams poll, you know, if you're doing virtual, you can totally use that. If you are like hybrid face-to-face and you have like one-to-one computers, there's a great website called polleverywhere.com. You can do the same type of thing. I know individuals have used Mentimeter as well, M-E-N-T-I, Meter, M-E-T-E-R. That's been great and it's really visually appealing. And then if you don't have one-to-one or you struggle with the, you know, having technology for every single student, you can absolutely, in the past, I've done like whiteboards where they like put their answer on a whiteboard or just even a piece of paper, and then all at once you hold it up, right? And it's directed straight to the teacher. So not everybody is like looking around, seeing what everybody's doing. So there's ways to navigate around this. It doesn't have to be just technological. All right. Flipgrid's another wonderful resource that I use quite often this year. Flipgrid, it has so many different capabilities. I think a lot of the time when we think about discussion, we think that discussion needs to happen one way. Question posed, students respond, other people respond, right? And it becomes this like, you know, back and forth idea, all verbal. And the reality is that doesn't have to always be the case. I think as education is shifting and we have technology at our fingertips, we have the opportunity then to like really break free from kind of those normal constructs that we are used to. And Flipgrid's been great for that. Flipgrid is great for all of these reasons, collaborative discussions, brainstorming together, debating, right? Even though it's over video and it's not happening like necessarily in front of everybody, it gives an opportunity to debate once back and forth, responding to questions, responding to their peers' answers. And so Flipgrid's been great. If you click right here, once you get this deck, I've created a like intro to Flipgrid slide deck that you're welcome to use to get yourself familiar if you're not familiar with it, or if you wanted to train others, feel free. But Flipgrid's wonderful. It allows you as an educator to pose a question. Students, you can create groups, aka little mini classrooms that your students enroll in. Within those classrooms, you have different topics. Students can go on and use Flipgrid as a response. So say you pose a question about some literature we're reading, right? So say we're reading, I don't know, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird here, and talks about Scout's, dynamic shift of personality from beginning to end of novel, right? You can have the students go on and give their, perspective, including, citing direct text from the novel. And then from there, students can then go on. You can leave it unmoderated, meaning everybody in the group can see it. Students can then go on and respond back to their peers. This last semester for our fall final, students had to kind of craft a prompt, a writing prompt, and then write about it using rhetorical analysis. And then ultimately what they did is they went on to Flipgrid and they gave a recap of their article. And then I had their peers go and have to respond to whatever, the article was trying to argue. And so it was kind of a really neat back and forth exchange, a lot of really kind of robust conversations that were happening via Flipgrid, because a lot of the time those students who are maybe more introverted are a little hesitant to engage or share their ideas in real time like this, right? Because they have a harder time processing or developing. What Flipgrid allows them to do is they could pre-plan, and then they can get on and they can record a little bit and then pause themselves, and then record a little bit more and pause themselves, so that they can gather thoughts along the way rather than having to do it in one straight shot. So it's a little bit of a scaffold for those individuals who need a little bit more processing time. And then a new feature Flipgrid came out with is if students didn't want to show their faces, they can do mic only, right? Some students still are very hesitant to show their faces on video. And so there's an option for just them recording their voice. And it just looks like this, and you'll see a little, wavelengths. So Flipgrid's great. I've used it for presentations, and then response to presentations. I've used it for writing feedback. I've had individuals share a piece of their writing. The cool thing about Flipgrid is you could take a picture and like superimpose it on the screen. So I've had them share their writing and kind of work through it. Flipgrid also allows you to screen share. So students could even just screen share and kind of talk through their writing. And then you can have peers come and give responses back on, if we're focusing on thesis statements perhaps, or claims, I feel like your claim was a little weak here, or maybe you need more stronger reasoning here, or really great job, just giving that effective peer feedback, which is always a struggle and I haven't perfected yet. We are close to being done here, but a couple more. Breakout rooms in when we're teaching virtually are kind of the norm. I've used them quite a bit to really engage student with peer-to-peer discussion, because it's not enough to just do peer-to-teacher or peer-to-whole class. It is important that students are also collaboratively discussing with their peers, in my opinion. And so I've used breakout rooms. If you're face-to-face, this could also be done using small groups, or pairs, depending on what restrictions or limitations are present. But in breakout rooms, for those individuals who maybe are feeling a little hesitant or nervous, are introverted individuals who don't feel super confident, engaging with their peers, I always provide them some sentence stems or sentence starters to get them going. So students have the ability to grab these resources, have them. I have a class website where I upload all of my resources that students can go and click on. But if we're talking about discussion or argument, giving them the sentence frame and talking to them about building, I really want you to build on the other, your partner's conversation or your partner's comment. They can then go and look at these builder sentence frames. I agree with you because this, however, right? And that would kind of elaborate a little bit more. I use these sentence frames when I do something called philosophical chairs, which is like a debate style conversation. I didn't note it here, but I'd be happy to share that resource with you guys. It's essentially a very structured debate around specific topics. And I also use sentence frames and sentence starters when I do what are called Socratic seminars, which are discussions around text we've read, but always began and fueled by questioning. So if you're curious about either of those two resources, I'd be happy, just reach out and I'll email you or share it with you on Google. But sentence frames have been exceptional at giving students the opportunity to establish their understanding in a way that is clear and coherent. And it gets rid of some of the nerves that exist, right? Because they already know exactly how they can start and end. But yeah, breakout rooms are important. Sending them out, I always start with pairs to start. Once again, non-academic, like starting out with, you know, culture building. What is your favorite restaurant and why? Or who do you look up to the most? And then we come back together and then we'll send them out with the more academic style questions once they get some comfortability established. So those are kind of the extent. This one, breakout rooms with sentence starters, has been the most beneficial. I do want to encourage you all, like at the end of the day, I know sometimes discussions can be scary, because what it means is that you are, even though you can maintain some control, you have no idea where the discussion can go, right? So there's a lot of control that is given up there as well. But know that, like, even though the control might be given up a little bit, or you don't know if students are going to be hitting the, you know, idea that you're trying to get them to kind of get to, that's okay. You as an educator can always redirect the conversation. I encourage you, when any student shares out, whether it's on point or not on point, whenever they choose to take a risk and give their perspective, always provide positive affirmation. Never, ever, ever say, no, that's wrong, and move on. But instead of comments like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for that insight. So what I hear you saying is, and maybe to redirect the thinking just a little bit, don't be afraid to kind of call on those individuals you know that are confident to start, but also make sure that you give enough like voice to all students. I use Wheel of Names to randomly do call on people throughout the class period if nobody's volunteering. So Wheel of Names is a great education or ed tech resource. You can put all your students' names, you can customize it. It's a random spin, and then it'll come up on the student's name and they know they need to share out. At the beginning, I mean, just, you got to set a culture of, this is the expectation. I know it's uncomfortable, but we're going to do it together, and really truly work in those opportunities to support them along the way, because sharing insight, giving insight into those deep parts of your soul and your heart is challenging in and of itself. And so they need to know that you're along for the ride and willing to support them along the way. So if you want to connect at all, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter at @𝑠more_teach, or you can email me. I'd love to share any resources that you want, smoreedtech@gmail.com. And then all of the research that I did for this slide deck, I compiled into a Wakelet. So if you want to dive deeper into some of the research regarding anything that I discussed or talked about, you can just click right here, and it's a full Wakelet with all of the resources. And so yeah. That's that. Any questions? Any questions I can answer? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. But before I do, I also wanted to reiterate, you can grab this slide deck, bit.ly/smore with a capital S, discuss capital D.
This is great, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm passionate about it. So
before we will give some minutes for the audience to prepare questions or comments.
Sure.
I have wrote down some comments for you quickly.
Sure.
So I think today's topic is extremely important, because in the classroom, teachers do most of the talk. They talk a lot, and and your presentation today offers us a way to minimize our talking time in the classroom.
Yes.
and to motivate learners to talk through the different tools and techniques you have mentioned, especially sentence frames, which are really my favorite one. In speaking and in writing, they can be done both in speaking and in writing.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that we need to start making that shift. And I think that's the beauty of, if anything, if we can find the silver lining or the positive in this experience, I think that education is starting to make that shift. And I think the pandemic, it was already underway, but I think the pandemic and all of this nonsense has like escalated that and made it kind of move a little bit quicker. I think a lot of educators are finding like what they used to do in a traditional face-to-face setting isn't working as well as it did maybe in the past. And I think that, you know, we need to be gracious to ourselves along that journey, because it's not an easy one to shift overnight. But at the same time, we need to be gracious to our students as well, because they're not used to a lot of the, you know, taking that ownership of their own learning. I think one area that I am guilty of is kind of enabling them just a little bit too much to be passive learners rather than active learners. And so I'm really trying to make that shift in my own practice to ensure that they are doing the learning and being the co-creators of knowledge. And it's not just me saying, you know, I got this because I need to control the situation. And I honestly want to encourage everybody in this, like, if at any time in our educational careers or our lives, if there was a time for taking risks, the time is now. And I know it's scary because everything feels out of control, but truly, like, we're all just kind of figuring it out and surviving. And so now is the time to take risks, because I think there's a lot more grace that is being offered for those fail forward moments. And so taking the time, try something new, reflect on that, determine if that is the best course of action. If it is, keep it, move forward, and try to continually be innovative. If it's not, you know, then dump it and move on. But at least you tried something new.
Yes. So Shannon, you have mentioned memory bank. I love this idea of memory bank, because I feel that we teachers should also be a little bit work like a psychologist.
Yes.
Because when we collect information and details about students, and later use them to encourage them or to, you know, to do something. This is a great technique.
Yeah, you know, I am a big fan. Like I mentioned, much of my teaching philosophy is grounded in relationships. And I think a lot of the time when we think discussions, we often just resort to academic discussions. But I think those personal discussions and getting to know our students and having those conversations outside of the curriculum and the content are equally important. You're building a skill, an interpersonal communication skill that they need to thrive in their futures as well. And bonus, you know, they know that somebody cares about them. And so one thing I'd also do to kind of get that memory bank stored, once every like 6 weeks or so, I'll start a class by saying, today is, you know, Sunday, January 24th. What is one thing you'd like to share with me today? And we call it our 10-minute quick write. And it's, you know, in face-to-face, it was them just writing on a piece of paper. And now it's digital. I use a Google form. And what I do is I take every single one of those and I tell them, you know, you need to, it could be really anything, but all I want you to do is A, I want you to write for 10 minutes straight, and B, just tell me something good, anything that you want, right? And then I get all of those and I actually read them and I respond back to each and every one. So when I was face to face, I would do little comments on their papers. Now with Google form, I'll send in a follow-up email, you know, and half the time it's like, oh, I had cereal for breakfast, you know, and little things like that. And it's an opportunity for me to say, I love cereal. What's your favorite cereal, right? And then it opens that line of communication because I've made it personal. I'm no longer someone that is up here. I've still maintained the respect. I'm still their teacher, but I've shown them that like we can have discussions about your life at an equal level because you're worth it. I care about you and I value. And then I have those, like you said, memory bank. It's stored in my memory bank for future to say, you know, hey, you said you got a new puppy, how's that going? You know, and they're like, wow, you remembered. So
Yes, this is also related to, we shall call it a humanistic approach.
yeah,
When students don't like you, they absolutely will not learn from you. When
that's
there
right.
is when they hate you, the learning process stops basically.
Yeah.
So
And I think
we have,
go ahead.
yes, okay, yes,
I think educators struggle with that. I think sometimes they worry about crossing a line of comfortability, right? If I show too much of my personal self to them, then they're not going to respect me. But I truly believe it's opposite. If you show vulnerability and if you model and mimic that, then they're more apt to really truly go out of their way to do anything to impress you, to follow whatever you have, wherever you're guiding them, etc. So.
so we have the three CCS, three coaches here, your friends. We have Georgina, we have Vicky. They are saying hi in the chat. We
Hi
have
guys.
also we have some of your colleagues who mentioned. We have Shannon. She said that I have worked with Shannon and she gets great results with the academic discussion.
Oh, that's kind. She's
So
wonderful. Thanks, guys.
what's Shannon? What's what's kind of favorite way of teaching? Is it hybrid or face to face or
Yeah. So
other form of especially online, other form of online learning?
well, honestly, I would prefer face to face. Like I mentioned before, um, I was a communication major, and so nonverbal communication is kind of my thing. I like to read the nonverbal cues to understand like what's going on under the surface level. And so on virtual, which is what we've been doing for the last 10, 11, almost 12 months, um, you can't really get that, right? Because you only get a certain part of the Zoom screen or the Meet screen. So I prefer face to face, but there's a lot about virtual teaching that I won't abandon once I go face to face, right? Some of the tools, ed tech tools that I've integrated, things like Pear Deck and Flipgrid, that has allowed every single voice, even the introverted student, the one that's scared to speak up out loud, has given them a voice and a space to share their ideas. I have enhanced the creativity factor in my classroom tenfold, and I don't want to lose that. But I think that it's, this space, the virtual setting has given me the space to be able to do that and do it comfortably. And so I can't wait to see what that looks like when we go back face to face. But at the end of the day, I miss giving my students, encouragement and hugs and high fives. And so, and I am a huge fan of proximity monitoring. So like walking around and making sure everybody's on task. And I can't really do that 100% on Zoom. And so there's a lot of pieces about face-to-face that I think I miss, but there's also aspects of virtual that I'm going to bring back. As far as hybrid goes, I haven't taught in that setting, so I have no idea. But I can't imagine. I hear I think it's going to be challenging when and if we do return this year.
Great. You have mentioned Flipgrid. I have never tried Flipgrid, but you mentioned that maybe it's good for students who are a little bit shy because Flipgrid allows for more processing time, as you have said.
Absolutely, yeah, and you can also make it fun. A lot of our students are like fans of their phones, right? And so there's a really great app that works, especially for those individuals that struggle with like Wi-Fi or internet access. There's a great app that works. You can add frames and emojis and pictures, and you can draw, and you can decorate the screen. And so it kind of mimics that idea of like some of those apps that they use normally in real life. And so it's kind of that engagement factor, but also it allows them to take their time through it and process through it. And the cool thing about Flipgrid is there's this whole discovery library that exists out there. So if you're like hesitant because you're like, oh man, I have to start from scratch, there's a whole discovery library where educators across the world have already created topics that you can literally just copy and push out to your students. And so you don't have to recreate the wheel. So that's neat. They also have something called Grid Pals, where you can connect your class with a class across the world. And so there's some really cool features with Flipgrid. It definitely gives voice to individuals who are more shy or who need that processing time, or who are concerned about the way that they speak or sound, whether their English or any other language is broken, and it allows for moderation. So if, it's a sensitive topic, or kids are nervous about sharing with their classmates, you can turn on moderation, and the teacher is the only one that can see it and comment back, which I think is pretty neat as well, since you have that option.
Yes, thank you so much. This was a very great discussion.
Absolutely.
Risha Honab said that getting comfortable in uncomfortable spaces. Maybe she was referring to the online sessions or to your project with Georgina and Vicky.
Yeah, I definitely talk about kind of my experience with that. And really, I struggled in the beginning quite a bit, because a lot of my identity was grounded in the idea of being an educator and that space. And, I felt like I was good at it. And all of a sudden that was ripped away from me. And I didn't really know, at that point, because it all crumbled, I didn't really know who I was anymore, because my identity was so closely tied to like being a traditional educator. And so it was it was a process. I had to get comfortable with that discomfort and figure out, okay, I can sit and dwell in this and not grow, or I can choose to figure out, after lamenting and grieving a little bit, I can figure out what my next steps were. And, I feel like I'm a better human because of it, but it definitely was a challenge.
Yes, great. So do you have any kind of final comments, suggestions, tips for educators in general? And maybe you can also mention any future projects you will have with other educators or individually.
Yeah, I guess I will leave you with this. At the end of the day, like, remember that the pedagogy doesn't change, right? Even though much of our approach to education has had to shift, like, the pedagogy doesn't change. It's the design and delivery that has. And although that's hard, you are a rock star. Continue to fight the good fight. Keep your focus in mind. Don't forget that, like, you have a network of educators across the world who are ready to come alongside you and support you on this process and on this path. So if you're feeling alone, please, please, please reach out. Let us come alongside you and empower you and build you up. And let's do this walk together, because like Aziz mentioned in the beginning, we are better together. As far as projects go, I'm just going to continue to push 3 Caffeinated Coaches. It's something I'm really, really passionate about right now. And I think that we have and are doing good things. So if you'd like to join us on our podcast journey, myself, Georgina, and Becky, please head over to our website, 3caffeinatedcoaches.com. That's the number 3, 3caffeinatedcoaches.com, and say hi, reach out. You can find us at Twitter at _3CCs, at _3CCS.
Do we have, Shannon, do we have to bring our mug?
Oh, our mugs?
Yes.
Our coffee mugs, yes, always coffee in hand. We like to celebrate the caffeine that we consume, and if you're anything like me, you can't get through the day without some sort of caffeine. So whether that be coffee or tea, soda, an energy drink, we accept caffeine of all sorts. But we'd love to connect and chat with you.
Yes, I am a huge fan of this project. I watched, as I told you before, I watched some of your sessions, and you are talking about great things.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the affirmation and the encouragement. It means a lot. And thank you so much for this.
Yeah, thank you so much also for sharing your ideas with us.
Absolutely.
At Everyone Academy, and we hope maybe to have you for maybe another session or
I would love
another topic.
Anytime.
So thank you Thank you, Shannon, so much, and talk to you later, inshallah.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.